Andy.
I'll try and be unprovocative and unconvincing.
Impossible.
How would that be? Thank you. If you just wait 1 second while we switch technology. So don't start the clock yet. That will be good. That will be good. So when I say the word right, we can start the clock. Can we see this? Excellent. And can you all hear me? Thank you for inviting me to be at the Shanker Institute on this extraordinary panel with two astonishing teachers and recognized teacher leaders by your colleagues, actually, which is the best that any of us could ever be, I think. And also to be on this panel with Tony, whose work I've always read, respected, and referred to for a long time. So it's a terrific opportunity. The topic today, that my first sentence was stolen by Marla, but of course you can only steal anything intentionally, I think. And is it an art, a craft, or a science? And the answer is yes. And is medicine an art, a craft, or a science? And the answer is yes. And is science an art, a craft, or a science? And the answer is yes. So there are also more things than this as well. So let's not fetishize art or science or craft over and above any of the other two and more things that our work and other distinguished work is in life. I'm going to talk about these three things, and not exactly in six things, not exactly in this order. So top left is Michael Fullen and I. We've written this book called, a few years ago, called Professional Capital. It's been used by a number of teacher unions as a strategic priority, particularly in California. There's a lot of PhD dissertations coming out on this, and in 2015 it got a thing called the Gromeyer Award for the $100,000, which the IRS was very happy about. For the idea most likely to have worldwide impact in that year. Chapter 3 in this book is about this question, if you wanted to hear in more detail what we're up to. The image at the top in the middle is probably hopefully how many educators might feel after the next election. If you can see that, which is not emaciated but happy. On the top right is a friend and hiking partner of my family and I. Her name is Noel Dye, and she was she's an inventor, part of a group of women who invented the Swiffer under the company run by a man, Gianfranco Zaccai, and she's got interesting perspectives on one of the icons of improvement science and what it was like to do that work amongst a group of women. Bottom left is Valerie Lobanovsky, who long before Moneyball claimed to organize soccer effectiveness by the use of metrics and data by applying the principles of scientific Marxism to soccer with some interesting and strange effects. In the bottom is Henry Mintzberg, who's a Canadian management theorist from Montreal and has some interesting perspectives on the relationship between art, science, and craft in leadership. And on the bottom right is the Appalachian Trail, and we'll see where that comes in a short while. First is myself and my good colleague and friend Michael Fullen, and we pulled our work together, both research and advisory work, in a book called Professional Capital, where We said teaching is an art, and just as Seymour Saracen said in his book Teaching as a Performance Art, that an art is passionate, it's expressive, it's intuitive, it is inspirational, but be careful of getting carried away when you're inspired by what you're doing. It's not actually inspiring anybody else. So it can also be a little self-indulgent and narcissistic. It is a craft which we, like cabinetry, we practice and hone and improve over time. But beware of thinking it's only a craft, and that teachers don't need to be trained in universities. They only need internships with experts and veterans, and don't need cognitive science or child study or all the other things that Teach for America thinks we don't need either. And it is a science. And that it is informed by, but should never be driven by data and evidence. So I'm utterly opposed to the term evidence-based. Most of my colleagues now, as we advised in the fourth way and the global fourth way, we should use the word evidence-informed, because evidence combined with experience creates judgment. And the prime thing about all professions is judgment, not evidence over experience or vice versa. It is also some other things. It is a calling, especially if we work in public education, where we're not just educating individuals in maths and literacy, but we're also creating a world where we feel safe, inclusive, where there's no hate or xenophobia or violence. I just came back from Christchurch, New Zealand, so I know powerfully how important those things are of the new agenda of what public education now explicitly needs to be about, as well as math, science, literacy, and the things we can easily measure. It is a service to the public in that sense, and it's also a job. And all jobs are organized in a particular way. It's a form of work. The Chicago School of Sociology looked at how medicine is a job, classic study called Boys in White by Howard Becker, funeral directors, and teaching. They're all organized in particular ways. And I think what many of us say at the moment is teaching is not socially organized often to be either very good as an art, as a craft, or as a science, but rather is a narrow Frederick W. Taylor view of scientific management as a set of standardized, routinized operations imposed by authorities who have little or no direct knowledge of what effective instructional practice is. I'll come off the fence a little later, but you can roughly see where I'm going with this. So here we go with these people in order. Here's Henry Mintzberg. Henry, this is a random quote, but a nice picture. And Henry Mintzberg talked about, really kind of created this triangle of leadership, which is like teaching. Leadership at its best is teaching, and teaching at its best is leadership. They are both. That it is an art, a craft, and a science. And that ideally in a team, but not an individual, you need a blend of all these three. Few individuals are equally strong in all three areas. Some of us are stronger than in others. So the idea of teaching as a collaborative enterprise, not an individual enterprise, just like leadership, is extremely important. Each of these can have their excess. The artist can be narcissistic, the craftsperson can be tedious, and the science can become an emotionless technocrat, basically, all if treated as excess or unduly dominant. What Mintzberg also said, which is quite interesting, is if one of these does become dominant, the artist knows, good artist leaders know how to include the craftsperson and the scientist. Good craftspeople know how to include the artists and the scientists. But the technocrats are technocrats, and they only value technocrats. And they don't tend to include, they see the artists as flaky and the craftspeople as kind of mundane and hands in the dirt, and mainly value people like themselves. So if we want these three things integrating, we want them led not by a technocrat, but by an artist or a craftsperson who values the other things. Another way of thinking about this in terms of the social organization of teaching is what we talk about in our book, Collaborative Professionalism, about the culture of teaching when it is collaborative. And I used to be all about the first one, which is solidarity. You can read about this also in Phi Delta Kappan. Solidarity is about all the things Tony has written about: relationships, trust, communication, a fellow feeling, collective responsibility, all these things which Tony's work shows causally, not just correlationally, has an impact on student achievement and effectiveness, but also solidity of the stuff. I'm a recent convert to this. I used to think structures and protocols were bad things that destroyed relationships, but structures and protocols well managed and well organized and well handled, as we've seen in things like lesson study or teacher-led learning communities, the point of them is to improve relationships, not to avoid relationships or to destroy relationships. And when you have solidarity and solidity together, as we talk about in collaborative professionalism, you get pretty effective performance and practice. This is Noel Dye. Noel Dye worked on the team that invented the Swiffer, and it is an icon of improvement science. She has a podcast there that you can listen to. She is a hiking partner of my wife and I, a great inventor. She brought modern bowling back to America from Europe, so it didn't feel like 1973. And she also was on the team that invented the Swiffer. She explains that the Swiffer was largely invented through ethnography. It was a group of women doing, I mean, you've talked about this, it was a group of women doing ethnographic studies of how women did their cleaning. And they found interesting things, like the women would clean the house before the ethnographers came, which destroyed the entire enterprise. It's a bit like what teachers do before a school inspection, or teachers do before a learning walk or a walkthrough. So you don't get to see the real thing. And they had to say, for goodness sake, don't clean your house before we come. We don't want to throw dirt in it. We want to see the dirt as it is naturally. So this is science. But it is qualitative science, ethnographic science, which, well done and rigorously conducted, is also science. So we need to bear in mind with science what we mean by science, and that isn't always, or even mainly, or as predominantly measurable. As Leonard Cohen, the late Leonard Cohen said, things are going to slide in all directions. There'll be nothing you can't measure anymore. There'll be nothing you can't measure anymore. So that's Noel Dye and the Swiffer. Valerie Lobanovsky was the coach of Dynamo Kiev in the 1970s. He was the first in any systematic way, years before Moneyball, to introduce scientific management into soccer performance. He had a notebook and pen and marked down whether people did a pass or headed the ball or how much they ran. And then he got a computer, a huge computer in the 1970s, which led him to be investigated by the KGB. Because why would anybody want a computer of this size when they were a soccer coach? He applied the methods of scientific management to soccer training to such a degree, and he got good results, by the way, initially, to such a degree that he had his players practice with blindfolds. So they were interchangeable parts of a machine with all the humanity taken out of them.
Wow.
And this worked well for a while. Until he went to manage the Ukraine, then he went back to Dynamo Kiev. After the Berlin Wall came down, African players then started moving in, and none of them could fit into the system because they were individual and creative. And then when people left his team to go and play for other teams, like in the English Premier League or in France, they all had mental breakdowns.
Oh my God.
They went into shoplifting, alcoholism, depression, because they were nothing outside the machine. And if science dominates education, I do not want teachers or children to be nothing outside of the machine.
2 minutes.
He is, in our book, Uplifting Leadership, which looks at about 15 high-performing organizations in business, sport, and education that we studied empirically. where they all use data intelligently, but we're not driven by it. We should be the drivers, not the driven, in education. And an example of that is Fiat Motors, who use data relentlessly to improve performance. But bear in mind, red, amber, green, so you know red, amber, green, where you improve by those who are doing well are green, yeah. Those who are doing badly are red, those that are in the middle are amber. Do you know where that comes from? World-class manufacturing, auto manufacturing. So on the desk of a member of the executive was a huge book this thick, full of indicators, red, amber, green. And Fiat with Motors spends all their time on the red and the ambers, and they never talk about the greens. And in education, we need to talk about our greens and what we're doing well with them, as well as talk about the reds. Beware when we take any technology from another sector, including the metaphor of scaling up, which Richard Elmore has now renounced as being unsuited to complex environments. He was the first to apply it. Beware of any metaphor that is taken from a largely male engineering environment and transplanted into an environment which is predominantly led and conducted by women. So, I'll come off the fence in a minute. I've almost done.
Andy, just another minute or two,
Okay.
we're over.
All right, question.
Thank you.
Which medical specialization has the least representation amongst women?
No clue.
The answer is orthopedic surgery. I have a reason for this because I broke my ankle on the Appalachian Trail last August. So I've taken an unusual interest in orthopedic surgery. If you go to articles like this, you will, if you can see it here, it is the most male-dominated area of surgery because of the excess of regarding it. So I talked about the excess of science, but because of the excess of seeing it as a craft. It's basically seen like old boys fixing stuff in their basement. So you get out saws and drills, and it's kind of brutal masculine force that defines it in a way that it has been historically seen as unsuitable for women, and that actually produces a jock culture of men with men that is also an unsuitable environment. Science is actually starting to change the culture of orthopedic surgery by making it more precise, not so heavy, more directed, and so on. So I talked about the excesses of science, but we can also have the excesses of the other thing as well. Are you with me? Okay, so last, and then I'm done. Let me just tell you, to bring all this together, let me take you onto the Appalachian Trail, where I broke my ankle in two places. I've walked about a third of the trail now, last summer, and I needed a mountain rescue in the middle of the night.
Oh, man.
It took about 7 hours to get me off. And first of all, somebody sat with me on the trail who was a fellow hiker, even though I had terminal prostate cancer and was hiking the trail to show he could, and had a goal to get to, but he stopped to take care of me, and because there's a fellowship of the trail. So our relationship, teaching is an emotional practice as well as a cognitive practice, and these are one of the things that are important. But when the rescue team came up and we talked to them on the phone, I said, what do you propose to do? They said, we might reset your ankle without anesthetic. Because they're great people, but they don't have a lot of stuff. And so I gave them a big donation, by the way, because I said, you're great people, but I think you need more gear. So they bought some gear with the donation I gave them. And when they arrived, I said, I have two questions for you, the advance party, here they are. Not one. How many times have you done this before? That's the craft question. That's the Atul Gawande question. And one of them had done it a lot of times before, because they were going to reset it without anesthetic. Secondly, I said, what certification do you have? Because luckily they weren't HEAL for America, and they didn't say, I've always been enthusiastic about rescuing people, and I used to have lots of plastic figures when I was a child, and we all played doctors and nurses, but you know, don't just put your foot out, and if you don't scream too much, we'll be okay. So it was well qualified, And in the end, they didn't. They didn't. I said, look, even John Wayne gets whiskey. So I taught them out of resetting it without anesthetic. This is important because sometimes we have a culture in teaching that denies expertise and disvalues science. And we've got a lot of that going on in maths education now, and we're seeing it in the work we've just published online in Ontario, in Canada, where very few elementary teachers feel confidence in math. Yeah. And the math coaches are going in saying, don't worry, nobody's the expert here. We're all the same, we're just going to indulge in collaborative inquiry together. And the teachers are saying, for God's sake, give me an expert. Yeah. Because I'm clueless when it comes to teaching math. I'm clueless in math in my life. I'm clueless with math in... So we need to think differently about... we're in a world where people say everybody's an expert or nobody's an expert, and everything's fake. We need to reclaim. We need to reclaim expertise. The last thing I'm going to say is this, and then I'll close. When we engage in teamwork 90 days, there's something even faster than your work, Tony, and that is Agile Sprints. Yeah. So Agile Sprint comes out of Agile leadership. By the way, the critique of Agile Sprints, it's good for short-term things, but if you have it dominating the culture of your school, you tend to focus on the short-term improvements, on the things that are easily measurable, rather than on the long-term improvements that are things that are not. As well as caring for the thing, the improvement, you need to structure your work to care for the people. Here I am on somebody's back. They're carrying me out of... there's no trail. They had to bushwhack, so they're carrying me out. And two things happened here. One was he was saying to me, we're really worried about the guy in front because I got promoted today and he didn't. And to care for each other, to care for me, they had to care for each other. And we need to put effort and energy into that as well as the thing. So it's not just a team, it's a group, really. Secondly, the guy after him who carried me weighs 260 pounds. He was getting a bit tired. So I put my hand, just as we're getting to the end, I got hold of his hand. I was on his back. And I said, you're all right, Glenn. We're going to make it. And I did wonder why he wasn't saying this to me, actually. But I am an educator, and he said, that is so motivating for me. And I said, well, what else would I say? He said, you can't believe what people say. I said, well, what do they say? He said, I had somebody last week, he was on my back, and he said, I stumbled a bit. And he said, is that the best you can do?
Oh, Lord.
So the tone of improvement is also important on leadership. So when things aren't working, do we turn around and say to people, is that the best you can do? Or are we motivating, encouraging, inspiring? Is it an art, a craft, or a science? It is, all of these things. And a service, and a calling, but especially a job. It's being organized to be routine, standardized, low-level technical work, like scientific management. And the science needs to improve, absolutely, Tony. So does the craft. And how we develop people beyond 4 years. Beyond 4 years. And so does the inspiring artistry of it as well. If we look at high-performing countries and map backwards to what they do a bit of all these things, right, but no one of them dominates. And that is what we have to be careful of.
Thank you so much, Andy. As you can tell, we're only halfway through our panel, and there's already so many threads to pull on. So I would suggest you get out your index cards as we get ready to listen to our next two speakers. That was terrific. Andrea, over to you.